The last Anglo-Saxon king, Harold II, and the fall of England. In a single year, a nation was broken, a throne was seized, and the course of history was forever altered. This is not just a story of battles won and lost. It is the tale of England's darkest hour, of how three men's hunger for power led to the death of thousands, of how a king forged in fire fell beneath an autumn sky, and how the England that existed for half a millennium vanished in a single day. Act 1. The Rise of Harold. Before he was a king, before his blood-stained English soil, Harold Godwinson was born a noble's son around 1022, at a time when England stood at the crossroads of its own survival. What forces shaped this man who would briefly wear a crown? What drove him to defy two of the most dangerous warlords in Europe? And what might have been had he succeeded? Harold was born into the shadow of greatness and the burden of ambition. His father, Godwin, Earl of Wessex, was perhaps the most remarkable man of his age. A commoner who climbed higher than any before him, Godwin rose from obscurity to become the second most powerful man in England under Danish King Canute the Great. But what few knew then, and what history has nearly forgotten, was that Godwin's hands were stained with royal blood. The murder of Alfred Etheling, brother to the future king, would haunt the Godwin family for generations, and set in motion events that would eventually lead to England's fall. Canute recognized in Godwin a kindred spirit, ruthless, cunning, and fiercely loyal when it served him. By 1018, Godwin was made Earl of Wessex, controlling the wealthiest and most powerful earldom in all of England. To cement his position, Godwin married Gytha Thorkelsdottir, a Danish noblewoman whose royal connections brought the once common family into the orbit of kings. Together they would produce an extraordinary family, sons who would dominate England's politics, and a daughter who would become a queen. Harold grew up in this hothouse of power and intrigue. While other noble sons learned only the art of war, young Harold mastered the subtle weapons of court politics, the delicate balance of force and favor, and the cold calculations required to survive in a kingdom where today's ally could become tomorrow's executioner. Act 2. The Path to Power. By 1045, Harold had proven himself worthy of his father's legacy. King Edward the Confessor, a man who would later be revered as a saint but governed as a pawn, appointed Harold Earl of East Anglia. But Edward harbored a secret that would ultimately seal England's fate. He had spent 27 years in exile in Normandy, and his heart remained there, with the Norman lords who had sheltered him, with their customs, their language, and most dangerously, with their duke. In 1051, the fragile peace between King Edward and the Godwin family shattered. Perhaps it was Edward's growing favour toward his Norman friends. Perhaps it was the arrogance of the Godwins themselves. Whatever the cause, the family found themselves exiled, cast out from the kingdom they had helped to rule. For Harold, this must have seemed like the end. Instead, it became his crucible. While his father sought refuge in Flanders, Harold fled to Ireland, where he didn't simply hide. He plotted. He gathered ships, men, and a burning determination to reclaim what was lost. Within a year, the Godwins returned with an armed fleet. King Edward, facing the prospect of civil war, had no choice but to restore them to power. When Earl Godwin died suddenly in 1053, some say choking on a piece of bread, others whisper of poison, Harold inherited Wessex, becoming the most powerful noble in England. The shepherd's son was now but one step from the throne. As Earl of Wessex, Harold revealed himself as a man of exceptional ability. Unlike many nobles who ruled from comfortable halls, Harold led from the front. In Wales, he devastated the forces of Gruffydd ap Llywelyn with a campaign of such brutal efficiency that the Welsh king's own men turned on him, sending his severed head to Harold as a peace offering. But even as Harold consolidated power in England, across the narrow sea, another man was watching, waiting, planning. A man who believed the English throne should be his, William, Duke of Normandy. Act 3. The Fateful Journey. The year 1064 marked the beginning of Harold's downfall, though he could not have known it then. King Edward, now in his 60s and still childless, sent Harold to Normandy, perhaps to confirm Edward's promise of the throne to William, perhaps on family business. We may never know the true purpose. What we do know is that Harold's ship was blown off course and wrecked on the shores of Ponthieu, where he was captured by Count Guy and held for ransom. Ask yourself this: how might history have changed had that storm never blown Harold's ship off course? Had he never set foot in Normandy? For in that moment, the winds did not just change direction, they changed the fate of nations. Duke William, learning of Harold's capture, demanded his release. But this was no act of kindness. William understood something that Harold did not. On Norman soil, Harold would be a pawn in William's greater game. What happened next is depicted in vivid detail in the Bayeux Tapestry, a medieval propaganda masterpiece that tells the story from the Norman perspective. It shows Harold swearing an oath on sacred relics to support William's claim to the English throne. Did Harold actually swear such an oath? Was it made under duress? Or did the tapestry fabricate this moment to justify what was to come? These questions have haunted historians for nearly 1,000 years. What cannot be disputed is that when Harold returned to England, his fate, and England's, was sealed in a way he could not yet comprehend. Act 4. The Crown and the Crisis. On January 5th, 1066, King Edward the Confessor drew his final breath. The childless king had failed in his most essential duty, to provide a clear successor to the throne. The next morning, with extraordinary speed, the Witenagemot, England's Council of Nobles, elected Harold as king. By nightfall, he wore the crown. This moment of triumph would be the shortest reign of any crowned English king, just 9 months and 9 days. Even as Harold celebrated, ravens of war were gathering. News travelled slowly in the 11th century, but not slowly enough for Harold's comfort. When William of Normandy learned that Harold had taken the throne, his rage was legendary. The man he considered his vassal, who had sworn an oath on holy relics, had betrayed him. William began assembling an invasion force unlike any seen in Europe for centuries, but he would not be the first to strike. Act 5. Brother against brother. If Harold had one fatal flaw, it was his own flesh and blood. His brother Tostig, once Earl of Northumbria, had been exiled after his cruel governance sparked rebellion. Now he thirsted for vengeance against the brother who had failed to protect him. Brothers born of the same womb, nursed by the same mother, trained in arms together, now mortal enemies. In the saga of England's fall, no betrayal cuts deeper than this. Tostig was not content to wait. In spring 1066, he launched raids along England's coast, testing Harold's defences, searching for weakness. Finding little support, he fled to Scotland, but Tostig was merely the harbinger of a greater threat. In his exile, he had found an ally in Harald Hardrada, Hard Ruler, King of Norway. Hardrada was no ordinary king. Standing nearly 7 feet tall according to the sagas, he had served in the Varangian Guard in Constantinople, fought across the Mediterranean, and amassed a fortune in gold. Now, approaching 50, he saw one last great prize: England. With a fleet of 300 longships carrying as many as 15,000 warriors, Hardrada and Tostig crossed the North Sea in early September 1066. Their dragon-headed ships, symbols of terror for generations of Englishmen, appeared off the Yorkshire coast like demons from an ancient nightmare. On September 20th at Fulford Gate, they crushed the forces of the northern earls, Edwin and Morcar. York surrendered, offering hostages and supplies. The Vikings had returned to English soil. The great terror that had haunted England for 2 centuries was back, and England's king was nearly 200 miles away in London. What happened next defies explanation. Act 6. The Last Viking. When news reached Harold of the northern invasion, he acted with almost supernatural speed, gathering his housecarls, his elite guard, and calling the feared militia to arms. He marched north. In just 4 days, his army covered 185 miles, a feat that military historians still regard as nearly impossible given the roads and conditions of 11th century England. On September 25th, Harold's army approached Stamford Bridge, where Hardrada and Tostig were waiting to receive hostages. The Vikings, relaxing in the warm September sun, had left their armor with their ships. Many had removed their mail shirts in the heat. What happened at this small river crossing would be remembered in Norse sagas for centuries. The last great stand of the Viking Age, the death of the last great Viking king, and a moment when history itself seemed to hold its breath. As Harold's army appeared on the horizon, panic spread through the Norwegian ranks. According to legend, a single Viking berserker, a warrior consumed by battle fury, held the narrow bridge against the entire English army. Swinging a massive 2-handed axe, he cut down as many as 40 English soldiers before he was finally defeated, not by sword or spear, but by an English soldier who floated beneath the bridge in a barrel and thrust his spear up through the wooden planks. Once the bridge was taken, Harold's forces crashed into the disorganized Norwegians. Harold Hardrada, the giant who had survived decades of warfare across 2 continents, donned his famous blue tunic and waded into battle, swinging his great sword Land Waster in wide arcs that cut down men like wheat. But even legends are mortal. An arrow struck Hardrada in the throat, and the last great Viking king fell. Tostig Godwinson, Harold's brother, took up the Norwegian royal banner, refusing Harold's offer of mercy. He too was cut down, brother killing brother in the bloody mud of Yorkshire. By nightfall, so many Norwegians lay dead that, according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the English allowed the survivors to leave in just 24 ships, less than a tenth of the fleet that had arrived. As the sun set on Stamford Bridge, Harold Godwinson stood triumphant. He had faced one of the most fearsome warriors in Christendom and won. He had no time to savour his victory, for at that very moment, on the southern coast of England, sails were appearing on the horizon. Act 7. The Norman comes. While Harold was destroying the Norwegian threat in the north, William of Normandy had finally crossed the Channel with an invasion force of 7,000 men, knights, infantry, archers, and machines of war. Landing at Pevensey Bay on September 28th, William immediately began constructing fortifications and ravaging the surrounding countryside. William the Bastard, as he was known, born out of wedlock to Duke Robert of Normandy and a tanner's daughter, had spent a lifetime proving himself. Now he would claim the greatest prize of all. Harold received news of William's landing while celebrating his victory at York. Without hesitation, he turned his battered army south and began another grueling march, nearly 200 miles in just under 2 weeks. Many of his best warriors had been killed or wounded at Stamford Bridge. Others simply couldn't maintain the punishing pace and fell behind. By October 13th, Harold had reached London, where he briefly gathered reinforcements before pushing on to confront William. Consider the weight on Harold's shoulders as he marched toward destiny. He had been king for just 9 months. He had already fought and won a desperate battle against overwhelming odds. His men were exhausted, and now he faced an enemy as formidable as any England had ever known. Why did he not wait longer in London? Why not gather more men? These questions have tormented historians for centuries. Was it pride, strategy, or did Harold, with a warrior's instinct, sense that his fate was already written in blood? Act E8. Hastings. The day England died on October 14th, 1066, two armies faced each other on a ridge near Hastings, a place that would soon be known as Battle. Harold deployed his forces at the top of Senlac Hill, forming the famous shield wall, a nearly impenetrable barrier of interlocked shields manned by his housecarls, professional warriors who had sworn to die before yielding. William arrayed his forces below, Norman cavalry, unknown in England, on the flanks, infantry in the centre, and archers in front. That morning, as mist rose from the field that would soon be soaked with blood, no one knew that by nightfall, England's fate would be sealed for the next 1,000 years. The battle began with a barrage of arrows, largely ineffective against the English shield wall. William then sent his infantry uphill, where they were met with axes, spears, and stones. For hours, the battle hung in the balance. Then, in a moment, either of brilliant tactical deception or desperate retreat, historians still debate which, William's left flank broke and fled down the hill. Seeing the Normans flee, some of the English, against Harold's orders, broke from the shield wall to pursue. It was a fatal mistake. The Norman cavalry wheeled, surrounded the exposed English, and cut them down. Worse, they had created a gap in the shield wall. William ordered all his forces forward, hammering at the weakened English line. History often turns on a single moment, a breath, a heartbeat. For England, that moment came in the late afternoon at Hastings. How exactly Harold died remains contested. The Bayeux Tapestry shows him struck in the eye by an arrow, a detail that has become iconic. Norman accounts claim he was cut down by knights. What we know is that Harold fell, along with his brothers Gurth and Leofwine, and most of his housecarls, the elite of Anglo-Saxon warrior society, died with him, keeping their oath to the last breath. As darkness fell, the remaining English forces broke and fled. William had won. The human cost was staggering. Thousands lay dead or dying on the blood-soaked hillside. William had secured his victory, but it came at a terrible price. According to legend, Harold's body was so mutilated that it could only be identified by marks known only to his mistress, Edith Swanneck. Act 9. The Conquest Begins. William was crowned King of England on Christmas Day 1066 in Westminster Abbey. But a coronation is not a conquest. For years, the English resisted their Norman overlords. Rebellions flared across the land. William's To like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. Explore our channel for more captivating stories. And thank you for being part of the adventure.